Hello, everyone, to this special event of Pint of Science, brought to you today in partnership with the UK mission to the EU in Brussels. So I am Guillaume. I'm one of the two directors of Pint of Science Belgium. If you don't know Pint of Science, well, you should check our Facebook page a bit longer after this event. But in a nutshell, we are organizing once a year we had a little sound glitch. So I was saying, we are a science communication festival, one of the largest in the world. We are present in more than 25 countries now. In a nutshell, what we do, we take over 3 days in a year, usually in May, and we organize hundreds of science communication events throughout the world. So in Belgium, it's in 12 cities simultaneously, hundreds of speakers, and of course, here we are representing Belgium. And today's event is a bit delayed version of Earth Day. Today we're going to talk about climate change and health and people. So these are all very important topics right now. And to take you through the program and drive the event for you today, I'm going to give the floor to Lottie Free from the UK's mission to the EU.
Thanks, Gil. Hi, so I hope that I have unmuted and everyone can hear me. I'm Lottie Free, the Atomic Attaché at the UK mission to the EU in Brussels. And I'm also part of the team who has been working on COP26, which is the UN's climate change conference, which was due to take place in Glasgow in November this year, but has had to be delayed to 2021 because of the virus. So we thought that we'd just like to give you a heads up that there will hopefully be a new date very soon. And in the meantime, tackling the climate problem continues to be at the forefront of our mind. And we thought that as health is also at the forefront of everybody's minds, it would be a good time to bring the two together and organize this webinar. So I'm super excited that we have Dr. Madeleine Thompson and also Zoltan Maciej-Kuszubek to join us and speak today. And I'm going to pass over the floor to Madeleine, who's from the Wellcome Trust, and who's going to start us off with her presentation. So hope you all enjoy.
Thank you so much, Lottie. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, excellent. As Lottie says, my name's Madeleine Thompson. I'm currently at the Wellcome Trust in London, UK, where I'm the interim lead of the Our Planet, Our Health programme. And for those of you who are not that familiar with the Wellcome Trust, it is in fact one of the world's largest foundations. And it was started back in 1936 through the will of Sir Henry Wellcome. He was a medical entrepreneur and collector and a philanthropist. And he effectively left his very large fortune, which had been acquired from the development of a pharmaceutical company called Wellcome, which he developed with his friend and colleague, Silas Burroughs. So Wellcome was actually an American who came over to the UK in about the late 1800s, established himself there as a leading pharmaceutical company. And the way Wellcome works today very much reflects the breadth of his interests and his conviction that health could be improved when research generates, tests, and investigates new ideas. So the Wellcome Trust today, which is now completely independent from the original pharmaceutical company, is based in London. You can see the building, very nice building that is there on Euston Road. And it is politically and financially independent. It spends about £1 billion a year to support the mission of improving the health of everyone by helping great ideas to thrive. And that tells you very much that it is fundamentally a science funder focused on health. And if you go to the front webpage at the moment, you'll see an enormous amount of information about COVID and And that is because the Wellcome Trust is very much engaged with supporting the response to COVID at the moment and investing with others in the development of vaccines and therapeutics, etc., to respond to the current crisis. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll find that the Trust is involved in and has been involved in many other areas of science. Its main funding goes towards discovery science, really many lab-based blue sky or frontier research that's undertaken here in the UK or in Europe or in other countries around the world. And then it also has significant investments in specific topic areas, if you like. And I've illustrated these on the right-hand side. I mean, there was a lot of work on the policy interactions of science in the UK and Europe. Snake bites, finding the best treatments for snake bites, using data in science and health, transforming mental health interventions, vaccine development, drug resistance infections, or commonly called antimicrobial resistance issues, research culture, really important new area that the Trust has invested in, and of course, outsmarting deadly outbreaks and epidemics. But you can see in the midst of all of this, we have Our Planet, Our Health, responding to a changing world. And this program was initiated about 5 years ago with an investment of £75 million and has concentrated on looking at the environmental and global drivers of health with a focus on cities and urbanization, our food system, and climate. So within the structure of the program, we have invested significantly in a number of global partnerships. And you can see here that these partnerships largely concentrate on food and urbanization. And beyond that, we have significant, if you like, development partnerships, really trying to enable the field of planetary health and monitor and track what is happening in terms of climate change. We have been particularly focused on the issues around climate change and the Paris Agreement, and the need to develop that agreement in response to the current situation, where delays in the investments, delays in the delivery of the Paris Agreement have become quite significant. However, at the 2015 conference, the right to health as a core principle guiding action on climate change was really for the first time integrated into the documents, but we've seen that it's still not really well incorporated into the climate change discourse. So we have been working through our various investments to try and highlight and bring to the front the relationship of climate change and health. And one of these is through the Lancet Countdown, an international multidisciplinary collaboration dedicated to monitoring the evolving health profile of climate change and providing an independent assessment of the delivery of commitments made by the governments worldwide under the Paris Agreement. And if you go and look at the Lancet Countdown website, you can see that it regularly tracks over 40 global indices, either health or climate indices, that are relevant to seeing whether or not countries are making progress in this area. As I mentioned, the investments in urban issues and food have been central to the work that we've been doing. And in particular, we've been interested in looking at transport and air pollution. This is because, of course, air pollution, which links so directly to diseases such as lung cancer and heart disease, diabetes, and low birth weight, really provide an opportunity for what is called a co-benefit with climate change mitigation. If we're able to reduce the air pollution that is created either from industry or transport, we are also able to improve the health outcomes of urban populations. And this has become a significant part of the economy, if you like, of climate change mitigation, where we can see investments on the mitigation side produce significant economic and social benefits for health. And of course, there are many opportunities for solutions to air pollution that involve active transport, cycling, incentivizing electric cars, etc. We also see these opportunities on the food side, and diet in particular is one of the biggest sources of global emissions, accounting for about 25% of global carbon emissions. And in the UK is one of the biggest sources of household emissions. We note that red meat and dairy provide the largest global greenhouse gas emissions of all of the foods, and this implies that we need to think deeply about the type of livestock, how we want to develop the livestock sector going forward, how we need to develop our agriculture, etc., to provide not only the healthiest diets, but also the diets that are healthiest for the environment. And I want to leave this. Actually, I have to make a confession here. I actually, at the very last minute, because we'd had some changes, I put in a different set of slides, which was marginally different to the one that I was actually using. So I just want to make one point here about the importance of not only greening the urban environment and greening our food system, but greening the health sector. And greening the health sector allows us an opportunity to make our investments in health climate smart as well. And some of you may realize that the NHS, which of course is a phenomenal institution that is working at its absolute maximum at the moment under the current conditions, has also stated that it is seeking to move the entire organization to a net zero organization by 2050. And so there are real opportunities for not only making the health sector a healthier sector for people today, but also into the future. And that is the end of these particular slides. But actually, what I wanted to get across as my main message from this presentation is that there are significant opportunities for integrating health into the co-benefits of climate change mitigation. And that can be done in very practical ways that are around restructuring the way we build our cities, reorganizing our transport systems, re-engaging our public in particular to reduce waste and consider environmental impacts in all of the decisions that they make, and as well focusing on the food system. And I will come back later on with any additional questions that you might have, but that's my presentation for the moment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Madeleine. So Zoltan, if you're happy to start, then we can go with your presentation.
With my pleasure. Just checking whether you can see and hear me. Well?
Yeah, I can see and hear you, so hopefully everyone else can.
Yeah. Thank you very much again for the opportunity that I can speak about the climate crisis and how does it affect health. And I'm just basically following up many aspects Dr. Madeleine already mentioned, and my presentation will aim to present a public health NGO perspective perspective about how we see the link between COVID-19, the climate crisis, and how can we, and more importantly, the policymakers we talk to react to that. First, if you hear IFA, my organization, that basically means the largest public health umbrella NGO, and our mission is to improve population health by advocating for better policies. And we are an alliance of more than 80 member organizations, and this is our main value and asset, the wide membership. As you can see, we have both members active at European level and at national level, and they represent the wider public health community, meaning not only the patients, the healthcare professionals like doctors, nurses, but also organizations working on various diseases, heart disease, lung disease, but we also have representatives of population groups like the elderly, the children, and we also have the academic community with us who supports our work with evidence, and that's quite key if you would like to influence policies. And that's also what we do in practice. Our theory of change, if you want, that you can improve population health by influencing policies. And there's a wide alliance. We are active at global, European, national, sometimes local and city level, having a focus on the European side. I would like to stress an overlying principle, reducing health inequalities, which is crucial for our network. If you look at Europe, east, west, south, north, but also the poor and the wealthy, and even in cities, you see the differences between health and population health outcomes, and they are unjust because they can be preventable. And that also applies to the climate crisis and its health consequences. So the way we see an entry point to tackle climate crisis is one of the biggest risk factor for health, and this is air pollution. Air pollution, and I can only echo what Dr. Madeleine just said, it causes many diseases, and the science is clear and robust enough about that. There are many thousand studies demonstrating that it is harmful for our health in many ways. And indeed, it causes hypertension, it causes diabetes, it causes lung diseases, which then result also burden on the national healthcare system. Almost every day you have new literature about it. So basically every organ is damaged. And what is the worst of it? Air pollution affects everyone, but not the same way. Some people are suffering even more, living close to busy roads or having patients especially. So that's a serious issue we have to deal with. And this is where the discussion comes to the current coronavirus situation, because IFA and our members are on the front line when we witness the current crisis we live, the coronavirus crisis. And if you visit the IFA website, similarly to the Wellcome Trust, you will see we also collecting actions and how our members and we respond to that. But what is particular interest for the climate emergency and for today, the air pollution angle as an entry point, because there are many ways the current COVID-19 crisis interacts with air pollution. And one is that if you look at areas where there are many fatalities and it put pressure on the healthcare system, there is a correlation between the polluted air and the actual social damage. And this is because diseases I mentioned, like hypertension, diabetes, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, those patients suffering from that also suffering from COVID-19 more. And the same way, air pollution has the potential to damage our immune system. So if we leave a polluted area, then we happen to have the disease, it is less likely that our body can fight with them. Those are the negative aspects of it. However, there is also another aspect, because the lockdown measures governments and cities are implemented, basically had a side effect. They cleaned the air. And suddenly, they basically made visible the invisible. And we realized that in what kind of pollution do we live in? And why does it relevant then for the climate crisis? Here, as we see it, air pollution and the climate emergency are closely linked. And the COVID-19 crisis made it basically clear. The climate crisis impacts our health in many ways, direct ways and indirect ways. We witnessed in the past years extreme weather conditions, heat waves, new diseases are emerging, and the degradation of the biodiversity, which also led, some say, to COVID-19 as well. However, it is not only the problem linked, but potentially the solution is. Because if you consider polluting activities, industry, transport, agriculture, or heating, they are not only emitting greenhouse gases, but also many pollutants damaging our health. So the conclusion is quite clear. Then tackling the emissions could be the answer. And again, I would like to refer what Dr. Madeleine said. My organization was in the position to contribute based on the evidence to that process. And as a European advocacy organization, we helped the recent editions of the Lancet Countdown about the climate crisis and health. And indeed, those are really relevant indicators based on the scientific outcomes, which can then guide evidence-informed policy, and this is where our mission comes in. We transfer that evidence and we try to bring it to decision makers. I mentioned that IFA is also active at global level, and if we look at even the COVID-19 situation we are in, but also the climate crisis, we are talking about a global pandemic and a global crisis. Therefore, it is of utmost importance to act at the global level as well. And here, the role of the World Health Organization is crucial. We are leading the work basically on both climate and air pollution. And what my association is following is the WHO work on air pollution and health. There was a process started in 2018 to wake up the global community about that issue. And as it was just mentioned, the Paris Agreement and the Conference of the Parties is upcoming. There are also plans to bring together the air pollution global efforts with the climate crisis mitigation efforts as well. So it's very important to be reminded that we have the global agenda supporting us. So going back to the EU level, so it is for us, it is crucial then to see the EU realizing that and to act there. And if you look at the current commission, you have the president, a medical doctor, you have 3 vice presidents being responsible for the Green Deal, for social fairness and prosperity and digitalizations. All of them are very relevant to tackle the climate crisis as well. If you focus just the European Green Deal, which is the closest to the topic, there are many ways where policy measures in the Green Deal are linked to the climate crisis. The sustainable food, again, as Madeleine mentioned, via the agriculture ways is crucial. There are policies aiming at reducing pollution, which also has a potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I cannot highlight enough the importance of inequalities and reducing them. But we can also mention a specific plan on cancer, very specific disease. If you look at together, the question is, are they ambitious enough? Is there good enough to give an answer for that? And our answer is that the direction is good, but the ambition should be much higher. And one of the reasons is that all of them were drafted before the coronavirus crisis, but before the whole issue became crystal clear. So there is definitely a need to act. And again, being a representative of IFA, public health community and advocacy community, what can we do to achieve that? So basically, there is a need for action at each level. You can see the global, the European, and the national level, and also the local level. As I highlighted at global level, the robust implementation of the Paris Agreement is crucial. And there is also a way to bring issues forwards by having that new WHO-led treaty and process on air pollution. And we have to also remind that science is just updating the latest guideline on air pollution, which would be very crucial to take it as a basis for policy decisions. At EU level, we are witnessing a rapid response to the coronavirus, but we shouldn't forget the link to the climate crisis as well. And if we redirecting the budget, then if just take the example of transport, we are hearing about bailout measures that we have to think twice whether we would like to finance the same old way of polluting and organizing our transport, where we have a golden opportunity to make a change. So when there is any finances for the transport, for road transports, then zero and low emissions should be prioritized. With that in mind, the Green Deal should really take a holistic approach and tackle the main source of pollution: transport, energy, heating, and agriculture. And if we we are going to national level, the name is like the EU budget is a stimulus. It should be followed up by national measures, and there are many potential here where the city level is extremely important, because what brings the most benefit for the climate, for health, if we implement a modal shift from a car-based transport wherever is possible to move away and try to walking, cycling, and public transport. So I think that's a quite important challenge. So just to conclude, a green recovery is a must from a public health perspective, and we just shouldn't assume that change will happen if we are not asking for it. Pre-crisis pollution is already on its way to come back, so we must act on that to prevent that. When we are discussing an exit strategies from COVID-19, then we have to learn the lesson and try a sustainable way to keep air pollution and also greenhouse gas emissions at low level. And what we witness many times, delaying the Green Deal. Instead of that, we have to keep implement it firmly and increase the ambition. And with that, I reached the key points I wanted to mention, and I'm looking forward to continue the discussion with you. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much, Zoltan, and thank you again to Madeleine as well. I just wanted to quickly, while we were just following up on your points about the air pollution, Lily asked a really good question. She wanted to know if it was possible to know how much the sort of short periods of times with lower pollution levels will change things in the long run, such as now due to lockdowns, and how much of a lasting effect these might have, or whether that will sort of all be undone once we're allowed out of the house and driving around again in our pre-coronavirus habits.
Obviously, it is a challenge to predict what will happen, but what we have made, I don't know how much it is a relevant example, but the pandemic happened in China first, and they experienced the same in a way that pollution level went down, and satellite images prove that the pollution level went back shortly afterwards. So that gives us the confidence to assume that the same could happen. The damage of air pollution can be measured, and it is measured by the various impact assessment of the Commission. So and that's also something to be reminded when we design policies to also calculate that social damage. So when we reopen factories, when we go back, then how much money will be put on the healthcare system, but also we go back, and it's important to remind us health is a human right. If you look at the COVID-19 cases, many of them suffered from chronic diseases, and then many of them have already passed away, and there is no way to give those lost years back. So what we have to do is, again, look at what science says. I think the link is clear, and basically just basically be bold when you implement the policies, and then yeah. And I think if people are informed about that, then there will be also public support for that.
Okay, thank you so much. And I actually sort of, going on from that, wanted to ask you both a bit of a question, which I think Kate has already asked as well, just so you can see it there on the screen, which is a bit spooky. So she said it was really interesting to see initiatives to bring together climate and health at national, EU and global level, which you both touched on a bit. And since health is something more tangible for ordinary citizens, sort of in inverted commas, than climate change, which can sometimes feel a bit abstract, do you think strengthening this link can help engage people more on the climate debate? And for example, with COP26, when we host that next year, I don't know, Madeleine, if you want to come back on that first.
Thank you, Kate, for a great question. I think we're actually working on the premise that it's really important to engage the public in the climate debate through health, because there are many activities that are done for climate change mitigation, for example, where the public are not that involved. For instance, you can switch your building from fossil fuel energy to renewable energy, and most of the people in the building won't notice or know about it. So there are many activities that are or policies that are developed that have a really important impacts on the climate that the public are not following that closely. But there are aspects of climate change mitigation which absolutely require that the public are fully engaged. And also the public need to vote in politicians who will be proactive and will actually deliver on the climate agenda. So the connection to health, I think, makes it personal. And there are different ways of connecting. First of all is understanding the risks that climate change poses to health. I think it's becomes very apparent when we've seen what's happened in India, for instance, with heat waves, where now we are getting lethal heat waves affecting large populations, not infrequently. We also obviously had the big heat wave in Paris in 2003. We also see the co-benefit opportunities, which we've described today. And the other one is the engagement of the health sector themselves as potential advocates for climate change mitigation. Health at the moment is obviously the biggest global priority. It's on everybody's mind, the importance of health and the importance of our health services and of our frontline responders and the nurses and the doctors that are treating patients today. Their voice as advocates for climate change mitigation, which is becoming increasingly powerful, I believe really strongly is a great opportunity to engage the public and to help the public to commit to climate change mitigation and support the types of policies that are necessary. So yes, I think you're right. I think it is really important to bring health and the public together around climate.
Okay, thank you. Zoltan, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, basically, fully supporting what Dr. Madeleine just said. Maybe just to again highlight the opportunity in the current situations we are all in is that it made us aware how important our health is, and it seems that we have to lose something to start to appreciate it. And indeed, climate seems to be like it is everyone else's problems, but not mine. But and I believe that that if you look at the prevention level in a health, usually it is a common place that prevention is the cheapest cure. And the beauty of the situation and the challenge is that we can prevent both. so both the climate crisis and the pollution level, by simply rethinking how we do. So I think it is important to draw the right conclusions of what is happening today, because a pandemic can happen in the future as well. It shouldn't reach us in an unprepared way. And the role of healthcare sector, again, I agree what Dr. Madeleine said about that. It also a role for the health professionals, the health community in such to speak up about that, because if we just speaking purely about health and ignoring the surrounding climate crisis, then I think we will face a serious systemic challenge. So and that's what also we because then decision makers will listen.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. I think you've kind of answered Renata's question a bit there, unless there's anything else to add just about specifics. But I think Nadia's actually asked a really interesting question, which I also wanted to ask you about how you think that the COVID-19 stimulus budgets and sort of recovery packages, both for the EU and globally, could help or alternatively hinder, depending on how they're done. Again, Madeleine, I think if you want to start with this.
Well, I think it's incredibly important because, if you like, the stimulus budgets are huge amounts of funding that are going into the economies, particularly of the developed world. And in many ways, they may be used to prop up current industries, which we know are not really good choices for a carbon neutral future. And so the choices that are made in terms of which industries to support and which industries to help transition are really important to be made now. And I think that the speed at which this has happened is making it very difficult for the green environment to have the type of shovel-ready projects or processes where you say, yes, you can invest the money here now to get the type of economic response that we need. But we absolutely have to do that. And there is a real risk, I think, of very large investments going into industries that, will not help reduce the carbon footprint. So I think it's very, very important that people look at that very carefully now and make really significant decisions on this, because the resources are so large. It's not resources you're going to be able to recapture again in the future and move in another direction.
Okay, thanks. Zoltan, did you want to add anything onto that last point?
Yes, the risk is enormous because there are economic interests, and then indeed, if we do not add the additional health and climate arguments, then it is very likely that the pre-crisis model will be restored, which I think we should avoid. And one way to avoid that is obviously instead of short time planning just to save jobs right now, we also have to include the medium and long term. So also if you are thinking about sustainable way of transport, sustainable way of agriculture, there is also job creating potential, and also it is that's why it is called green economy. So then it can also benefit, and having those benefits, if we add the health arguments, because science is clear about the costs, the lives it costs, if we also include those elements, and that's why we are calling for a health impact assessment, but we can also add based on the scientific criteria, climate impact assessment of any measures, including the new budget, then I think we will go further.
Can I just add that I think it's also incredibly important in terms of engaging the public, because the whole world is going through a traumatic experience at the moment with COVID, and people need to look forward to a way of things working differently in the future, that the sort of pain of today will change things in a positive way. So I think there's a political opportunity that could be captured that will bring society forward, and that we shouldn't miss that.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, and definitely thinking about the work that we were doing on COP26, and one of the themes was clean growth, which was sort of tapping into this idea that you can build the economy in a way that's also really beneficial for the planet. So nice to see that that lines up neatly with what you're saying. So the next question, I think I wanted to come to Zoltan first, and it's been asked both by Grace and Nick, kind of touch on similar topics about the effect of mental health, on mental health even, and whether that's something that you have looked into. Nick mentions climate anxiety, and I think that's something that Grace has seen as well. And then the result of sort of economic impacts and how all of this can have a big impact on our mental health. So yeah, Zoltan, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about that.
Yeah, so our approach on health is many ways mirroring the WHO definition on health. And that's quite clear that it is not only the absence of diseases or good physical health, but it includes mental health. So it is, and it was a neglected issue for so many years. So it is, we have to be clear that when we talk about well-being and health, that includes mental health first. Then my second point is that, and with that, we like to demonstrate how we operate. If you look back also my slides and what I said, one of our member organization is Mental Health Europe, and with that they are the foremost advocates on mental health, and also our role to help and link them to the relevant policy processes. Because we face that issue in the context of the COVID-19. In the COVID-19 answer measures, when we also collect our member section, it includes also what mental health is doing. So now, when we are looking at policies, how should we change things? How should we assess the lockdown measures? How should we do things differently? When we are calling for impact assessment and what are the impacts on health, that should also include mental health aspects as well. So in that sense, this is a call we are, or a challenge, if you want, we are taking up, and we constantly implement it, and we remind decision makers to how to say, to look health in a holistic way, and do not forget about mental health.
Okay, excellent. And Madeleine, is this something that the Wellcome Trust has looked at?
Well, yes, actually. Though, I mean, the Wellcome Trust, I showed you in one of my earlier slides that mental health is actually one of the emerging areas for the trust to invest in. And this is largely because, the scale of the problem, and that was pre-COVID, but you can imagine it being significantly worse going forward, the scale of the problem and the lack of significant investment in this space. So the trust is definitely engaged here, and we're in very early discussions about how this may relate to climate. But I think it goes way beyond climate anxiety. I mean, primarily, the climate impacts often result in very significant mental health issues, in particular from flooding in Europe as a real significant source of mental distress, and from the impacts that you get in the developing world from loss of agriculture, migration, food security issues, etc., all of which have very significant mental health associates. So and going back to the question around air pollution and the relationship of air pollution to mental health as well. So there are many ways that we could think about looking at the relationship of climate and mental health, and not just climate anxiety. But yeah, we're definitely interested, and we'll be sort of exploring that further.
Yeah, okay, great. So I think we are on to our last question. So that is a shout out to anyone else watching who has been too shy to ask a question yet. Then this is coming up to your last chance. So Will has said, thanks for the super interesting discussion. Just building on this, at some point next year, governments will come together to agree great climate ambition to deliver on Paris. Do you think the current crisis and the lessons we're learning from working together can help build momentum for COP26? Or do you think continued separation of health and climate in people's minds will make it difficult to mobilize action? So Madeleine, I don't know if you want to go first on that one.
Sure. Another great question. I mean, personally, I think that, you know, the depth of the COVID crisis is such that you could say that it's distracting or engaging so much energy. There is very little room at the moment for climate, but climate is obviously incredibly important and we need to act on climate now. So this is one of the roles of this particular webinar, is to keep that discussion going, but also, as we've already discussed, climate and doing something about the current climate situation provides us with a lot of opportunities going forward in terms of transforming our economies towards net zero, etc. So I think there's the possibility to build momentum, but it's not going to happen by itself. It really needs to be amplified by all sorts of individuals and organizations going forward. I do think there's a couple of things that I think are really super positive that's come out of the dreadfulness of the current situation. And that is the role of experts has re-emerged as important contributors to discussions and helping societies to think through how we can address major crises. So I don't believe experts are, good at everything in any way, but expertise is very relevant to thinking through what are the right solutions that we should invest in for tackling the climate crisis. And the other thing is, I think, is that cooperation is essential to dealing with the climate crisis, as it is essential to dealing with COVID, and sort of reinforcing that science is important and global cooperation is really important. That's true for COVID. It's true for the climate crisis. I think that provides us an opportunity to build momentum in a way that maybe a while ago was not there. So I do, yes, we need to build on what we have. And the fact that COP is delayed, which is obviously essential in the current circumstances, it does give us some time to organise and push a really proactive, ambitious agenda.
Okay, excellent. And Zoltan, did you have anything to add on that point?
Yes, indeed. So if you look at the current COVID situation and how did it impact the climate movement, and more specifically the COP, obviously there is a technical and a more meaningful impact. The technical impact is like any event, it has been postponed. But I think we shouldn't consider it as anything more than that, because it is much more important what will be then the real impact of that. And I really hope that it will be considered as it is, a wake-up call. COP, by its definition, is a global process. All countries are coming together to deal with the climate crisis. The coronavirus crisis was also a global one. So in that sense, I think that also suddenly reminded people how interconnected we are, how we are dependent we are, and how the ecosystem, the transport system, the pollutions binds us together. So indeed, a global answer is needed. And also, what is important that health is not anymore the business of health ministries only. And because that doesn't work anymore. We see signs of hope in the EU. Even some countries, the president is talking about more health at EU level. So I think the lessons for COP is to bring the health and the climate community together and discuss the two issues together.
Okay, thanks. So actually, I think this next question is one for you again, Zoltan, because you mentioned the impact assessment. I think it was you. And Guillaume has asked the question about, do you have evidence that health impact assessment and co-benefit analysis actually work to convince policymakers to drive change in transport or agriculture?
Basically, all of our work and policy making is based on evidence and not on emotions. So the way how the major EU legislations are prepared by impact assessment. So without a proper impact assessment, there is no decision making at European level, which also impacts then the national level. So in that sense, the role of science is there. So sometimes it is science itself is not enough. It is true, it is valid, but there are other economic interests as well, which tend to sideline the public interest and health in some cases. So we need an equal footing to ensure that the health arguments are as powerful as the non-health arguments, and there where in public interest intervention is needed. So the voice of sciences should be disseminated. If you want, you can call it the light tower impact. So you have the light there, but you have to disseminate it in order to reach the decision makers. So we believe in it, evidence-based decision making.
Okay, and Madeleine, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is plenty of evidence that health impact assessments do change decisions, and you know, and in particular, get standards into legislation. You know, that's the real key thing, is legislating such that health is one of the key variables that are taken into account. And that is true for pollutants, it is true for many other things. One of the really exciting things that happened this year in the UK was the fact that the Heathrow expansion did not go ahead. And that was directly because of the legislation passed in the UK's Climate Change Act last year, which came into effect. And it was shown that Heathrow would contravene the UK's net zero strategy. And so legislation, I think, is absolutely critical at the national level for ensuring that whether it's transport or urban development or the food system, etc., are being moved towards a net zero environment. And examples for in London as well is that health has basically been the main argument for the ultra low emissions area at the centre of London to keep pollution down because of the enormous impact that has on asthma in children, etc. So health has been used as a major argument to change transport systems and develop standards.
Yeah, I think it's going to be super interesting to see how much the decision about Heathrow has an impact on future decisions as well, as you point out. So what I'm going to do is ask Kate and Katie's question, and then somebody has asked for a sort of clear, concrete message as a conclusion. So just to give you a bit of warning to start thinking about that. But just before, Kate said that one sector particularly affected in the adaptation sphere is agriculture. So she'd be interested to hear a bit more about linking climate proofing agriculture with health.
So the first thing is about agriculture. Obviously, that involves livestock or plants. We know that a shift in the diet is really important in terms of reducing emissions and improving health. So the changing in land use, changing the agricultural production, etc., is absolutely critical to that. And the report that came out was the Eat Lancet Commission with what should be considered a planetary health diet. Basically said that primarily it doesn't have to be a vegetarian diet, etc., or a vegan diet specifically, but it should be a low meat diet, a low dairy diet, a high fruit and veg diet, and that will have significant benefits for health and produce a substantially lower carbon footprint for the industry. So I think that's one aspect. Now, when it comes to climate proofing, that is thinking more about the risks, agricultural risks that occur because of climate. We know that the big bread baskets of the world are regularly suffer from droughts, floods, etc., which has big and significant impacts on global food security, and of course that happens locally as well. So one of the ways that you can protect agricultural production is to have a better understanding and better prediction of what's happening in the climate system, and that is something that has been increasing globally and is particularly useful when you can see a season ahead whether or not you're likely to have droughts come in. So other linkages directly between agriculture and health come from the relationship of aflatoxins, for instance, in agricultural production and their relationship to the climate, and being able to predict the climate, predict and prevent losses to pests and fungal transmission, etc. I don't know if that's exactly the answer, if that answers the question, but those are the sort of areas that I think one could consider.
Yeah, no, I think certainly answered it for me. And yeah, Zoltan, just want to give you a chance to add a bit more to that.
Basically, healthy agriculture is good for our own health because it produces healthy food, but also good our climate because it reduces agriculture-related pollution. Most of the pollution, more than 90% comes from industrial farming. So if we rethink the way it is organized, and that's also what's happening now, people are going local. I think that's also a way we can shift more climate-friendly, more public health supportive agriculture. Yeah, and policy proposals on that. Health is an objective of the common agriculture policy. There is a farm to fork strategy which is planned to delayed. Now here it comes the responsibility. We have to recognize the importance of the food system and agriculture.
Okay, Guillaume, do you think we have time for one last question, or are we running over?
Let's go for it.
Okay, so last question comes from Jamie. He says, thank you for a very interesting talk. Just quickly, if there is time, I was wondering if you could touch on animal agriculture as an issue relating to pandemics, diet, personal health, and obviously climate environment. How could this topic perhaps be taken more seriously after COVID-19? So I suppose just building on that agricultural bit that we'd gone into before. I don't know who wants to go first, Sultan or Madeleine?
I could just start off with the issue of zoonotic infections. So what we know is when we have new infections, emerging infections like COVID, new to human populations, the majority of them come from animal, wild animal backgrounds. And so farming systems and the way we live now with biodiversity loss and increasing encroachment of human populations in wildlife areas, that increases the risk of zoonotic infections transferring from wild populations into human populations. We've also seen it in industrialized pig farming with the H1N1 a few years ago. So there are increasing risks around new viruses emerging from wild or livestock situations at the moment. I think we've discussed a little bit about the importance of changing agriculture and reducing meat production and making meat production in particular much less industrialized. And in the UK, I think there's a lot of interest in actually even moving some of the cattle production back to woodland environments rather than in fields, etc., which cattle actually are a woodland animal originally. So it may be kind of nice. But I think that you've obviously seen globally, in the newspapers recently, the call to get rid of wet markets, obviously, and China itself having banned wet markets in the last few weeks. These are not old style Chinese markets. As far as I understand, they're actually relatively new. They've come into development over the last 20 years as a popular type of market, but they've obviously create an opportunity for transfer of wild viruses into human populations. So I think there's going to be a lot of action actually on that biodiversity front to make sure that there's less opportunity for viruses from wild animals to enter the human population. So I think we're starting to see those policies being developed already.
Right, thanks. And yeah, nice cow fact. I knew about pigs and acorns, but I had never heard that cows are actually a woodland animal. Zoltan, do you have anything you wanted to add on that bit?
Actually, there is one key aspect I would like to add to the discussions linking animal welfare, health, and crisis we live in is antimicrobial resistance. The way industrial farming is organized, a lot of unnecessary use of antibiotics can create superbugs, so bacteria which do not respond. And if you end up being in a hospital, then even if a virus infections, you can have a bacterial one. If antibiotics do not work, then your chances of survival are less good. It is a crisis itself. But if it aggravates the climate crisis, and in the light of the COVID-19 is there, and one of the key issues is to be solved is via agriculture and to implement prudent use of antibiotics. And again, that's another cause, another crisis, just to change our animal. How do we treat animals, basically?
Okay, thanks. So I think that brings us to the end of our questions. So your last parting shot, one kind of take-home message for everyone. Zoltan, do you want to go yours first?
Yeah. So again, the COVID-19 crisis made the invisible visible. Now the climate crisis won't go away, and we should absolutely prevent going back pre-crisis pollution level. And the way how we can solve both the climate emergency and tackle air pollution is basically reducing emissions, and we have to find a sustainable way to do that. And decision makers at global, European, and national and local level should have the political courage to do that.
Okay, thank you. And Lynn?
Absolutely support everything that Zoltan has said. Really, really important. And I think my just final message is really that health is such a fundamental right to us, and climate is absolutely part of our health, and we need to understand that connection at a very personal level, and we need to act on it at both a personal and a community and a national level, so that we really see how things go across the board. And we should never think of climate change as something that is out in the future, in the next 50 years, etc. It's actions today and the impacts today that we have to deal with. So climate change is of the present. It has a very significant impact on health, and acting on it not only helps us improve our health, but also gives us the economic opportunity, if you like, where climate change mitigation has very significant co-benefits in health that really have a significant economic value. So it's not just the health question, it's not just the climate question, it's really fundamental to our economic system. And that we have no excuse not to act. It's my parting shot.
Excellent, both excellent parting shots. And that has been really fascinating to listen to you both, and great to see sort of how much overlap and how much dialogue there was. And thank you to everybody who has been watching. This was, a bit of an experiment for ArcMIS, so I was a bit nervous, but it seems to have gone pretty smoothly. And thank you for your questions and engagement. And huge thank you to Madeleine and Zoltan for joining us. So Guillaume, I don't know if you want to say any final words before we finish up.
Yes, of course, I wanted to thank you both, three of you, for participating today. It was very interesting, a lot of very good questions. And the last word for me would be also to remind everybody that even though we can't meet in person, it's always very pleasant to have this kind of interaction online, as long as we have to. Hopefully, through Pint of Science or any other kind of similar activity, we would have these kind of discussions live around a pint of, or a cup of tea, whatever works. And if today wasn't enough for you, don't forget that, or at least check our Facebook page. Our friends from the Brussels team of Pint of Science here are organizing a weekly event every Thursday around 6 o'clock. You can find that on Facebook, see if you like the topics, and come and listen on your spare time or while doing something else, doesn't matter. Thank you everybody again. Lottie, if you want to add any last word on your side, otherwise I'm done.
Nope, that's all for me. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you again, Madeleine and Zoltan. Thank you, Lottie. Have a nice evening to everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.